You know that specific sound a bespoke Italian leather briefcase makes when it hits a mahogany conference table? That heavy, muffled thud that screams, I cost more than your rent, and I contain the fate of your quarterly bonus? I lived for that sound. For 10 years, I was the ghost in the machine at Archer & Co. I was the senior strategy analyst who turned red ink into black, the woman who whispered in the CEO's ear when the board was out for blood, the fixer who knew where all the corporate bodies were buried because I was usually the one holding the shovel. I wasn't just an employee, I was the structural integrity of the entire firm. Richard, our CEO, a man whose tan was 3 shades too orange and whose ego was 3 sizes too big, called me his North Star. He'd look me in the eye over a scotch at the Harvard Club and say, "Allison, when I move up to chairman, that chief strategy officer chair has your name etched into the lumbar support." I believed him. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was assuming that competence still mattered in a world run by bloodlines and veneers. By the way, if you're into watching corporate empires crumble in real time, or just want to see a woman methodically dismantle a nepotism baby's life, go ahead and hit subscribe and maybe give this a like. It helps the algorithm find the other vengeful souls out there. Okay, back to the carnage. The beginning of the end didn't look like a disaster. It looked like a 24-year-old girl named Madison. Madison was Richard's niece. She had an MBA from a university that sounded like a salad dressing brand and the kind of vocal fry that could strip paint off a hatchback. Richard brought her in as a special projects consultant, which is corporate code for we need to give her a salary so she stops trying to become a DJ in Berlin. "Allison," Richard had said, leaning over my desk with that used car salesman grin, "take Maddie under your wing. Show her the ropes. It's good leadership practice for when you take the big chair next quarter." So I did. I showed her the ropes. I showed her the financial modeling software. I showed her how to read a P&L statement without passing out from boredom. I spent 6 months essentially running a daycare center for a girl who thought synergy meant everyone getting along and who asked me if we could expense her therapy dog's organic kibble. I fixed her slide decks at 3 a.m. I rewrote her emails so she didn't sound like a semi-literate influencer. I was polishing the very knife that was about to find a home between my shoulder blades. The betrayal happened on a Tuesday. It's always a Tuesday. Tuesdays are the days hope goes to die in a PowerPoint presentation. It was the Q3 all-hands meeting. The entire company was packed into the main auditorium, fidgeting with their phones, waiting for the usual rah-rah speech about how we're disrupting the paradigm or whatever buzzword salad Richard had tossed together. I was sitting in the front row, wearing my future CSO blazer, Armani, tailored, sharp enough to cut glass. Richard was on stage, pacing back and forth. I can hand. He looked sweaty. He looked like a man trying to sell a monorail to a town that had already been scammed by a monorail. "We need fresh vision," Richard bellowed, his voice echoing off the acoustic tiles. "We need agility. We need the kind of forward-thinking leadership that understands the digital native landscape." My stomach dropped. Digital native landscape? The only thing Richard knew about digital natives was that they didn't like his Facebook posts. That is why, Richard continued, gesturing grandly to the wings of the stage, "I am thrilled to announce our new Chief Strategy Officer. Please welcome, Madison Archer." The silence in the room wasn't just quiet, it was a physical vacuum. It sucked the air out of my lungs. I watched as Madison bounced onto the stage, wearing a pink pantsuit that looked like it was made out of bubblegum wrappers, waving to a room full of people who had been working there longer than she had been alive. She grabbed the mic. "Hi guys," she squealed. "Oh my god, I am so pumped to pivot this company into the future. We are going to disrupt everything." I didn't blink. I couldn't. It felt like my blood had been replaced with liquid nitrogen. I looked at Richard. He caught my eye for a split second, then immediately looked away, feigning interest in Madison's shoes. He knew. The coward knew exactly what he had done. He had taken my decade of loyalty, my 80-hour weeks. I saved deals, and he had handed them to a girl whose hardest decision in life so far had been which filter to use on her brunch photo. The applause was scattered, polite, terrified. The CFO, a man named Marcus who had the personality of a spreadsheets tab but knew quality when he saw it, looked at me. His face was a mask of horror. He knew who actually did the work. He knew who kept the lights on. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't storm the stage and strangle Richard with his own Hermes tie, although the thought was a vivid, beautiful hallucination. Instead, a cold, metallic calm settled over me. It was the kind of calm you see in the eye of a hurricane, right before the roof gets ripped off. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked out of the auditorium while Madison was midway through a sentence about holistic brand vibes. I walked straight to my office. I didn't pack a box. I didn't take the framed photo of my dog. I didn't take my award for Employee of the Decade. I sat down at my computer and typed 2 sentences. To Richard Archer, CEO from Allison DeWitt. Subject, resignation. Congrats to Madison. I resign effective immediately. I hit send. Then I printed it, signed it with a pen that cost more than Madison's car, and walked it over to HR. the HR director. A woman named Linda who lived in fear of her own shadow, looked at the paper, then at me. Allison, she whispered, her eyes wide. Is this? Are you sure? Richard will flip. We have the board meeting next week. Who's going to prep the deck? Madison is the CSO, I said, my voice smooth, devoid of any jagged edges. I'm sure she has a vision for the deck. Something about pivoting, I believe, but she doesn't know how to access the server, Linda stammered. Sounds like a strategic challenge, I said. Good luck, Linda. I walked out of the building. The New York air smelled like garbage and exhaust, but to me it smelled like sweet, intoxicating liberation. I hailed a cab. My phone started buzzing in my pocket. Richard, once, twice, 10 times, I turned the phone off. They thought this was a tantrum. They thought I was just a scorned woman who would go home, drink a bottle of wine, cry to her therapist, and eventually come crawling back for a consulting gig. They thought the story ended here. But I wasn't just a strategist, Richard. I was the architect, and you don't fire the architect after you've moved into the house, especially not when the architect is the only one who knows the foundation is built on a sinkhole. I didn't just leave. I left a void. And I knew, with the mathematical certainty of a well-balanced equation, that nature abhors a vacuum. Madison wasn't ready for the job, but she was certainly ready for the fall. And I intended to be there, not to catch her, but to make sure she hit every single branch on the way down. The next morning, I didn't wake up to an alarm. I woke up to the silence of a calendar that had suddenly been wiped clean of 7 o'clock a.m. alignment calls and 8 o'clock p.m. crisis mitigation Zoom meetings. It was disorienting, like stepping off a treadmill that had been running at sprint speed for 10 years. But then the rage kicked in, not the hot, messy kind that makes you key a car, but the cold, crystalline kind that makes you topple a regime. I had to go back one last time. HR protocols. The exit interview farce. I dressed for a funeral, all black, severe lines, lipstick the color of a fresh arterial wound. When I walked into the lobby of Archer & Co., the receptionist, a sweet kid named Jason, looked like he was about to cry. Miss DeWitt, he whispered, It's chaos upstairs. Madison ordered a kombucha tap for the break room, but she accidentally canceled the Bloomberg terminal subscriptions to pay for it. Priorities, Jason, I said, breezing past security. The elevator ride up was the longest 30 seconds of my life. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't the hum of productivity anymore, it was the buzz of nervous energy. People were huddled in cubicles, whispering. When they saw me, the whispers stopped dead. I walked down the hallway like I owned the mortgage on the building. Madison was in my office. She hadn't even waited for me to clear my things. She was sitting in my ergonomic chair, spinning back and forth, talking loudly on speakerphone. No, I don't care about the legacy accounts, Tyler. They're so. Energy, we need to pivot to crypto or NFTs. Are those still a thing? She saw me and stopped spinning. She didn't look ashamed. She looked annoyed that I was interrupting her visioning. Oh, hey, Allison, she chirped. I was just vibing in here. The feng shui is way better than my cubicle. Hope you don't mind. Richard said it was cool. It's all yours, Madison, I said, my voice flat. I'm just here for my files. Totally, she said, waving a hand. Take whatever. Oh, and hey, no hard feelings, right? Uncle Richard said you were totally chill about it. Totally chill. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was a child playing dress-up in a burning building. No hard feelings, I lied. Just a word of advice, Madison. Watch the Q4 projections. The spreadsheet has a macro that auto-updates from the legal server. If you break the link, the SEC compliance triggers a red flag. Her eyes glazed over. Macro, is that like diet thing? Something like that. I walked over to the filing cabinet. This was the moment, the setup. I unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside wasn't a stash of snacks or gym clothes. It was my in case of emergency leverage, but I didn't take it all. I took the personal items, my Rolodex of private contacts, the hard drive with my intellectual property. But I left one thing behind. A single, slate-gray folder placed conspicuously on the empty desk surface was labeled Internal Audit and Governance Gaps, 2020 to 2024. Inside that folder was a memo I had written 6 months ago, detailing several procedural anomalies in how Richard handled vendor contracts. It wasn't illegal yet, it was just sloppy, dangerous. The kind of thing a competent CSO would read, panic over, and fix immediately to protect the CEO. Madison wouldn't read it, or if she did, she wouldn't understand it. She'd probably use the back of the pages to sketch logo ideas, but someone else would find it eventually. And when they did, it would be proof that the issues were known, documented, and ignored. Are you going to take the plant? Madison asked, pointing to my dying fiddle leaf fig. No, I said. It needs sunlight and attention. I don't think it'll survive the new administration. I walked out of the office, leaving the folder there like a loaded gun on a coffee table. I went straight to HR. Linda was sweating. Allison, Richard wants to do the exit interview himself, she said, wringing her hands. No, I said, standard forms only. I sign the NDA regarding trade secrets, I take my accrued vacation pay, and I leave. If Richard wants to talk to me, he can speak to my attorney. You have an attorney? I'm a strategist, Linda. I always have a contingency. I signed the papers. I didn't glance at the non-compete clause because I knew it was unenforceable in New York if the resignation was under constructive dismissal pretenses, which giving my job to a niece arguably was. But I wasn't going to fight them in court for a settlement. That was too small, too petty. I wanted the kingdom. Or rather, I wanted to watch the kingdom burn so I could roast marshmallows over the embers. As I walked to the elevator, Richard burst out of his corner office. "Allison," he shouted. He looked disheveled. "Don't be dramatic. Come back inside. We can create a role for you, senior advisor to the CSO. We'll keep your salary the same." I turned and looked at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He wanted me to be the brain while Madison wore the crown. He wanted me to do the work while she took the credit, all for the low price of my dignity. "Richard," I said, loud enough for the bullpen to hear, "I don't do advisor. And I certainly don't do babysitting. You wanted a new direction? You got it. Enjoy the view." The elevator doors closed on his red, sputtering face. I walked out of the building with nothing but my purse and a single locked file folder tucked under my arm. It felt light. But the weight of what I was carrying in my head, the codes, the clauses, the buried bodies, was heavy enough to crush them all. I wasn't unemployed. I was just freelance. My first project was the demolition of Archer and Co. To understand how I was going to gut Richard, you have to go back 3 years. It was a rainy November in 2021. We were courting Greenpoint Capital, a private equity firm with pockets deeper than the Marianas Trench and a reputation for being about as warm and fuzzy as a velociraptor. We needed their money to scale. They needed a mid-market firm with high potential. It was a match made in capitalism. The negotiations were brutal. Greenpoint sent their lead counsel, a man named Gordon Vane. Gordon was a legend. He didn't argue, he just stared at you until you questioned your own existence. Richard was terrified of him. Richard liked deals that happened on golf courses with handshakes and scotch. Gordon liked deals that happened in windowless rooms with 400-page contracts and blood oaths. I was the point person on the deal structure. Richard couldn't be bothered with the boring legal stuff, so he delegated the redlining to me and our in-house counsel, a guy named Dave who was mostly there to make sure we didn't accidentally sell the building. It was 2:00 a.m. on the final night of negotiations. The conference room smelled like stale pizza and high-stakes desperation. Gordon was sitting across from me, looking fresh as a daisy. I was running on caffeine and spite. "We need a safeguard," Gordon said, tapping his Montblanc pen on the table. "Greenpoint isn't in the business of funding vanity projects. If leadership fails, we need a trigger to protect our investment." Dave, our lawyer, bristled. "We can't give you a board majority. Richard won't sign it. He needs to maintain control." Gordon looked at me. He knew I was the one actually building the model. "Allison, thoughts?" I looked at the draft. I knew Richard. I knew he was getting lazy. I knew he was already talking about bringing family into the business. And I knew that if things went south, I would be the one expected to fix it with no authority. I saw an opening. "What if we add a conditional clause?" I suggested, keeping my voice steady. "Not a board majority by default, but a competency trigger. If specific KPIs, EBITDA, retention, compliance, drop below a certain threshold for 2 consecutive quarters, or if there is a material breach of governance protocols, Greenpoint gets temporary voting override to restructure the C-suite." Dave frowned. "Richard won't like restructure. Call it strategic realignment capability," I said. "He loves the word strategic. He won't read the definition." Gordon's eyes narrowed. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. He saw exactly what I was doing. I was building a fire escape for the investors and a trapdoor for the CEO. "Article 7D, Gordon said, a small, terrifying smile touching his lips. "Strategic realignment due to governance failure or material mismanagement." We drafted it right there. The language was dense, buried in the middle of page 142 of the Shareholder Rights Agreement. It defined material mismanagement broadly, including hiring of unqualified executive personnel without independent board review and gross negligence regarding compliance reporting. The next morning, Richard breezed in to sign the final documents. He was hungover, wearing sunglasses indoors. "Did we get the valuation we wanted?" he asked, hovering the pen over the signature line. "Yes," I said. "We got the money. And I still have 51% voting rights. As long as the company performs, Richard." I said, "It's all standard." "Great. Boring legal mumbo-jumbo," he laughed and scrawled his signature. He didn't read a single word, he didn't even flip the page. He was too busy thinking about the press release. Gordon shook Richard's hand, but he looked at me. There was a moment of silent acknowledgement. A nod. Game recognized game. That document, the Shareholder Rights Agreement, was currently sitting in a vault at Greenpoint Capital. Richard had a copy in his office safe, probably under a stack of Golf Digest magazines. He had forgotten Article 7D existed. But I hadn't. Article 7D wasn't just a clause, it was a kill switch. And Madison, with her kombucha taps and her complete lack of regulatory knowledge, wasn't just pressing buttons in the cockpit. She was dancing on the launch codes. All I had to do was wait for the material mismanagement to become undeniable. And based on what I had seen in her first 24 hours, I wouldn't have to wait long. I had the map. I knew where the mines were buried. Now, I just had to watch them step on every single one. It took exactly 3 weeks for the wheels to come off. I wasn't surprised by the crash, I was surprised by the velocity. It was like watching a toddler try to pilot a Boeing 747, tragic, terrifying, and impossible to look away from. I was sitting in my apartment, wearing sweatpants that cost less than my old dry cleaning bill, sipping coffee and watching the stock ticker. Archer & Co. was holding steady, but the internal chatter on LinkedIn and Blind, the anonymous corporate gossip app, was a five-alarm fire. New CSO just banned Excel because it's not visually inspiring. We have to submit budgets in Canva now. Anonymous employee, is it normal for strategy meetings to start with a vibe check and end with a group chant? Asking for a friend who wants to quit. Verified Archer employee Madison was busy disrupting. Her first major initiative was something called Project Neon. From what I could gather from my former contacts, who were texting me frantically at all hours, Project Neon was a complete rebrand of our core B2B service offerings. Archer & Co. made its money providing boring, reliable logistics analytics to boring, reliable manufacturing firms. Madison decided this was stale. She wanted to pivot to lifestyle logistics. She fired the external compliance auditing firm, a company we had used for 7 years to ensure our data handling met federal privacy standards. Why? Because, I quote from a leaked email forwarded to me by a terrified junior analyst, their logo is ugly, and their lead auditor gives me bad energy. We're going with this boutique agency my friend Tyler runs. They do crypto consulting, but they're super agile. That was strike one. Firing a certified auditor for a crypto consultant friend wasn't just stupid, it was a potential breach of our data security covenants. Strike two came in the form of the vendor town hall. Usually, I handled these. I would present the quarterly roadmap, reassure our suppliers, and talk about supply chain resilience. Madison decided to turn it into a vision quest. She showed up 20 minutes late, wearing a headset microphone like she was doing a TED talk. She didn't have slides. She had a mood board. We're moving away from rigid contracts, she told a room full of steel manufacturers and shipping magnates. We want our partnership to flow like water. We want to operate on trust and blockchain vibes. The suppliers, men and women who dealt in tonnage and tariffs, stared at her blankly. Then the questions started. Does this mean you're changing the payment terms? Payment terms are so binary, Madison replied. We're looking at dynamic value exchange. Translation, we aren't going to pay you on time. Within 48 hours, 3 major vendors paused their shipments. They cited uncertainty regarding fiscal governance. I sat in my living room, downloading every report, every leaked email, every panicked text message. I wasn't just gossiping, I was building a dossier. I had a folder on my laptop titled The Fall. It contained 1. The email firing the auditor. 2. The transcript of the vendor town hall recorded by a loyalist in the AV booth. 3. A screenshot of Madison's new organizational chart, which eliminated the risk management department and replaced it with a brand evangelist team. But the cherry on top was the Q3 financial revision. Because Madison didn't understand the macro I warned her about, she had manually entered revenue projections into the master deck. She added a zero, just one little zero. Instead of projecting 4% growth, she projected 40%. She presented this to the internal leadership team. Richard, desperate for a win, didn't check the math. He signed off on it. They sent the preliminary guidance to the investors, including Greenpoint Capital. It was fraud, accidental, incompetent fraud, but fraud nonetheless. In the corporate world, stupidity is not a legal defense. I looked at the document on my screen. The 40% growth slide. It was in a font called Papyrus. Oh, Madison, I whispered to the empty room. You just handed me the gun. It was time. I didn't want to go back to Archer & Co. I didn't want my job back. I wanted justice. And justice in my world wore a bespoke suit and carried a very thick briefcase. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. Gordon Vane's office, the assistant answered. This is Allison DeWitt, I said. Tell Gordon I have an update on Article 7D, and tell him to bring the good wine. The wine bar was called El Aubly, the Oblivion. Fitting. It was dark, expensive, and quiet enough to plan a murder or a hostile takeover. I was sitting in a corner booth, a glass of Sancerre untouched in front of me. On the table sat the physical copy of my dossier, bound in nondescript black leather. Gordon Vane walked in at 7:05 p.m. He hadn't aged a day since the deal 3 years ago. He still looked like a shark that had learned to walk upright and wear Tom Ford. He slid into the booth opposite me, his eyes scanning the room for eavesdroppers before locking onto mine. Allison, he said, his voice a low rumble, you look rested. Unemployment suits you. Consulting, Gordon, I corrected. I'm a free agent, of course, and I assume this meeting isn't just to catch up on old times? He gestured to the black binder. I hear you received the preliminary Q3 guidance from Archer & Co. Yesterday, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Gordon nodded, taking a sip of the water the waiter had placed. Aggressive numbers. Richard is bullish. 40% growth in a stagnating logistics market? It's a miracle. It's a typo, I said. Gordon froze. The glass hovered halfway to his mouth. Excuse me? I slid the binder across the table. Open to tab 3. He opened it. He saw the side-by-side comparison. My original model showing 4% growth, and Madison's Project Neon slide showing 40%, with the manual entry clearly highlighted. She broke the formula link, I explained. She thought the cell looked lonely, so she typed in a number that felt right. Richard signed off on it without an audit because he's too busy trying to convince the board that Madison is a prodigy. Gordon stared at the page. His jaw tightened. If this is true, they just submitted false guidance to a majority shareholder. That's securities fraud. It's material mismanagement, I said, emphasizing the phrase we both knew by heart. Turn to tab 4. Tab 4 was the email chain regarding the firing of the compliance auditor and the hiring of Tyler's crypto and consulting shack, or whatever it was called. Gordon read it. He read it again. He closed his eyes for a brief moment as if praying for patience. She fired Deloitte for a vibe mismatch, and she replaced them with an uncertified entity owned by a personal friend, I added. That triggers the vendor integrity clause in the investment agreement. It's a breach of covenant, Gordon. He closed the binder. He placed his hand on top of it, claiming it. The shark smelled blood. Why are you giving me this, Allison? He asked, studying my face. You want the CEO chair? Is that the play? We invoke 7D, decapitate Richard, and install you as the savior? I took a sip of my wine. It was crisp, cold, perfect. No, I said, I don't want the chair. I don't want to fix the mess she made. I've spent 10 years fixing Richard's messes. I'm done being the janitor. Then what do you want? I want the record corrected, I said. I want them to know that competence isn't hereditary. And I want to watch the look on Richard's face when he realizes that the boring legal mumbo-jumbo he ignored is the thing that ends him. Gordon smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who just found a loophole the size of a truck. Article 7D requires an emergency board session, he said, his mind already working through the bylaws. We can call it for governance concerns. We don't have to specify the evidence until we're in the room. Tuesday, I said. The board meets on Tuesday. Tuesday it is, Gordon said. He tapped the binder. You're thorough, Allison. You always were. I built the house, Gordon. I know exactly where the load-bearing walls are. You know, he said, signaling for the check. If we execute this, the stock will take a hit. Short-term pain. Better than a long-term death spiral, I countered. You're cutting out the rot. And what happens to you? I'll be fine, I said. I have a front row seat. We stood up. Gordon shook my hand. His grip was firm, cold. You're a dangerous woman, Allison DeWitt. I'm just a strategist, Gordon. Strategy is just the art of making sure the consequences land on the right people. He left with the binder. I stayed for another glass of wine. I watched the rain streak against the window. Somewhere uptown, Madison was probably ordering custom beanbag chairs for the boardroom, thinking she was winning. She didn't know that the paperwork for her eviction had just been filed. The weekend before the Tuesday board meeting felt like the heavy, static-charged air before a tornado touches down. I stayed offline mostly, but the ripples were impossible to miss. Madison had announced Project Neon would launch on Monday. The internal leaks were tragic. Apparently, the new branding featured a logo that looked suspiciously like a phallic symbol if you squinted, and the tagline was logistics for the soul. On Monday morning, the launch happened. It was a disaster. Website crashed because they hadn't paid the server hosting fees. Madison forgot to forward the invoice to accounts payable. The new dynamic pricing model confused the automated ordering systems of our 3 biggest clients, causing a backlog of $12 million in orders that simply vanished into the digital ether. By Monday afternoon, the stock price had dipped 4%. Not a crash, but a wobble. A warning. I received a text from Marcus, the CFO. Marcus, it's a bloodbath. Richard is blaming IT. Madison is crying in the meditation room. Are you coming back? I didn't reply. At 4 p.m., the bomb dropped. Not publicly, but in the inboxes of the board of directors. Gordon moved fast. He sent a formal notice to the company secretary. Emergency board meeting requested by Greenpoint Capital. Agenda, review of governance protocols, and Q3 guidance discrepancies. Richard must have seen the email and laughed. He probably thought it was a formality, a check-in. He was so insulated by his own arrogance that he couldn't imagine a world where he wasn't in control. I knew this because he called me at 6 p.m. Allison, he sounded breathless, fake cheery. Long time. Listen, we have a board check-in tomorrow. Greenpoint is being fussy. I need you to. Well, I know you're gone, but maybe you could just look over the deck. For old time's sake, I can pay you a consultant fee, double your rate. The desperation leaked through the phone like sewage. He wanted me to save him. He wanted me to make the numbers make sense, to hide the 40% growth lie, to smooth over the compliance breach. I'm busy, Richard, I said, chopping vegetables for a salad I intended to enjoy thoroughly. Busy? Doing what? You're unemployed? I'm strategizing, I said. Allison, please. Madison is. She's overwhelmed. She's a visionary, but she needs operational support. Just come in tomorrow. 9 a.m. I'll be there, Richard, I said. You will? Oh, thank God. I knew you were a team player. I knew it. I didn't say I was coming to help, Richard. What? I said I'll be there. Goodbye. I hung up. The stage was set. Richard thought I was coming back to patch the holes in the hull. He didn't realize I was coming to watch the ship sink. I spent the rest of the evening picking out my outfit. I chose a white suit, not morning black, white, the color of cleanliness, the color of a fresh start, the color of a surgeon stepping into the operating room. I slept like a baby. Tuesday morning dawned gray and rainy. Perfect New York boardroom weather. I arrived at the Archer & Co. building at 8:45 a.m. Security hesitated, but my badge hadn't been deactivated yet. Another oversight by Madison. I didn't go to the strategy floor. I went to the executive floor. The boardroom had glass walls, frosted in the center but clear at the top and bottom. A fishbowl, I saw them inside. Richard was pacing, looking agitated. Madison was sitting at the head of the table, my seat, effectively, scrolling on her phone, looking bored. The other board members were seated, looking grim. Gordon Vane hadn't arrived yet. I stood in the hallway, just out of direct sight near the coffee cart. Marcus, the CFO, walked by. He saw me. He stopped. He looked at my white suit, then at the closed boardroom door. Allison, he whispered, what are you doing? Just watching the market correct itself, Marcus, I said. You might want to go inside. You don't want to miss the opening act. He looked at me, confused, then terrified. He hurried inside. Then the elevator pinged. Gordon Vane stepped out. He wasn't alone. He had two junior associates with him, both carrying boxes of files. And he had a man in a gray suit who looked painfully like a forensic accountant. Gordon saw me. He didn't wave. He just adjusted his tie and walked toward the boardroom door. The executioner had arrived. Gordon pushed open the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. The sound of conversation inside died instantly. Richard stopped pacing and put on his best fake smile. Gordon, good to see you. We were just discussing the minor hiccups with the launch. Growing pains, right? Gordon didn't smile. He didn't sit down. He walked to the end of the table, opposite Richard and Madison. His associates placed the boxes of files on the table with a heavy thud. This isn't a discussion about growing pains, Richard, Gordon said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room. It carried out into the hallway where I was standing. This is a formal invocation of Article 7D of the Shareholder Rights Agreement. Madison looked up from her phone. Article what? Is that like? A bylaw? Boring. Gordon ignored her. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single document. It was thick, stapled, and flagged with red tabs. He slid it down the long mahogany table. It spun perfectly, coming to a rest right in front of Richard. Notice of leadership disqualification proceedings, Gordon stated. Richard stared at the paper. Disqualification? You can't. I have majority voting rights. I own this company. Not under conditions of material mismanagement, Gordon said. We have evidence of securities fraud regarding the Q3 guidance. We have evidence of gross negligence in vendor compliance. And we have documentation of willful destruction of internal governance controls. Fraud? Richard's face went pale. That was just a projection, a draft. Was submitted to the investor portal, Gordon said. That makes it a binding disclosure. And since the numbers were fabricated, manually entered, overriding the financial model, it constitutes intent to deceive. The room went deadly silent. The other board members, old money types who cared about nothing but their own liability, started shifting in their seats. They looked at Richard like he was radioactive. But Madison did the deck, Richard stammered, throwing his own niece under the bus without a second of hesitation. She's the CSO. She prepared the numbers. Gordon turned his gaze to Madison. She looked small suddenly. Her boss babe confidence evaporated. I just thought 40% looked better, she said, her voice trembling. It was a manifestation goal. I was manifesting abundance. You manifested a federal crime, Miss Archer, Gordon said coldly. He signaled to the forensic accountant. You're freezing all executive authority effective immediately. An external audit team is on its way up. Security will escort the current C-suite off the premises pending the investigation. You can't do this, Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Allison, where's Allison? She can explain this. She knows the model. Allison isn't here to save you, Richard, Gordon said. Allison is the one who documented the fire while you were handing out matches. Richard froze. The realization hit him. He looked around the room, wild-eyed, then he saw me. I was standing just outside the glass wall. My white suit caught the light. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't gloating. I was just watching, impassive like a judge at a sentencing hearing. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from the document to Gordon to Madison and finally back to me. The betrayal he felt was palpable. It was nothing compared to the betrayal he had served me. The board will now vote on the suspension motion, Gordon said. Seconded, said the board chairman, a man who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years but knew a sinking ship when he saw one. All in favor, every hand went up. Except Richard's and Madison's. Motion carried, Gordon said. Security, 2 uniformed guards stepped into the room. It was clinical, it was precise, it was beautiful. Madison started crying. But my office, I just bought a velvet couch. Leave the couch, the guard said. As they were escorted out, Richard stopped near the door. He looked at me through the open glass. He looked old, defeated. You built this trap, he whispered. I built a safety net for the company, Richard, I said, stepping forward so only he could hear. You just decided to jump without checking if you were caught in it. He walked away. The sound of his footsteps fading down the hall was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The silence in the boardroom after Richard and Madison left was heavy, but it was a different kind of heavy. It wasn't fear anymore, it was the vacuum left by a sudden power vacuum. The board chairman, a man named Sterling who wore bodies unironically, cleared his throat. He looked at the empty chairs at the head of the table. Then he looked at Gordon. Then, inevitably, all looked at me standing in the doorway. Miss DeWitt, Sterling said, his voice dripping with sudden, sycophantic warmth. Perhaps you should join us. I walked into the room. I didn't sit in Richard's chair. I didn't sit in Madison's. I stood at the end of the table, leaning slightly against the credenza. Mr. Sterling, I said, this is a most unfortunate turn of events, Sterling said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. We had no idea the extent of the mismanagement. You had the quarterly reports, I said calmly. You had the audit memos. You chose not to read them because the dividends were clearing. He flinched. Truth hurts, especially when it threatens your liability insurance. Yes, well, he stammered, we must look forward. We are effectively rudderless. We need an interim CEO, and obviously a competent chief strategy officer to clean up this Project Neon mess. The room murmured in agreement. Heads nodded. They were looking at me like I was a life raft in a storm. Allison, Gordon said, his voice neutral. The board is prepared to offer you the CSO position, effective immediately. With a significant equity package, I assume? He looked at Sterling. Double the equity, Sterling cried, triple whatever it takes. We need stability. We need someone who knows the codes. It was everything I had wanted 3 weeks ago. It was the title, the money, the validation. It was the victory lap. I could sit in that chair, fire the sycophants, rebuild the strategy, and rule the kingdom I had saved. I looked at the faces around the table. Old, frightened men who only valued competence when their own necks were on the line. I looked at the life logistics mood board Madison had left on the easel. I felt nothing. The hunger was gone. The ambition to lead this specific company had evaporated the moment I saw Richard dragged out. It wasn't my kingdom anymore. It was a crime scene. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Sterling, I said. The room held its breath, but I decline. Sterling's jaw dropped. Decline? But you wanted this. You engineered this. I engineered accountability, I said. I didn't engineer a job interview, but who will run the strategy? Marcus, the CFO, asked, panicking. I can't do the projections alone. I looked at Gordon. We had discussed this possibility. I recommend you promote Sarah from the analytics team, I said. She's smart, she's diligent, and she actually read the compliance manual. She can handle the interim role. Sarah, Sterling asked, the girl with the nose ring, the woman with the master's in data science, I corrected. She's your best bet. I pushed off the credenza. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lunch reservation. Allison, Sterling called out as I turned to leave. Where are you going? What are you going to do? I paused at the door. I looked back at the room, the mahogany table, the expensive chairs, the panic in the eyes of the powerful. I'm going to start my own firm, I said, and my first client is Greenpoint Capital. We're going to be looking very closely at mid-market companies with governance issues. I suggest you keep your house in order, Mr. Sterling. I walked out. Gordon caught my eye one last time. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. Salute from one predator to another. I walked to the elevator. The air felt lighter. My heels clicked on the marble floor, a rhythm of pure, unadulterated freedom. I wasn't just walking away from a job. I was walking away from the need for their permission. 2 months later, the dust had settled, but the landscape was permanently changed. Richard took an early retirement due to health reasons. The press release was vague, but the industry knew. He was toxic. He moved to Florida, where I assume he spends his days cheating at golf and complaining about cancel culture. Madison tried to pivot to being a lifestyle coach on TikTok. Last I checked, she had 400 followers and was trying to sell a course on corporate manifestation. I watched one video. She was filming in her parents' basement. I didn't like it. I didn't dislike it. I just scrolled past. She was irrelevant. Archer & Co. survived barely. Sarah, the analyst I recommended, stepped up. She's doing a good job. She calls me sometimes for advice. I bill her my full hourly rate. She pays it happily. As for me, I'm sitting in my new office. It's a loft in Tribeca. Exposed brick, big windows, no mahogany tables. The sign on the door says DeWitt Strategic. I didn't steal Greenpoint's business. I became their partners. Gordon Vane and I have a standing arrangement. He finds the companies that are rotting from the inside, and I go in and perform the surgery. Sometimes we save the patient. Sometimes we just salvage the organs. Either way, we win. I received a package yesterday. No return address. Inside was a framed photo of the Archer & Co. executive team from 5 years ago. Richard, me, Marcus, we looked happy, or at least we looked profitable. Tucked into the frame was a note on Richard's personal stationery. You were always the smartest person in the room. I just forgot that meant you were smarter than me. I tossed the photo in the trash. I kept the frame. It was high quality. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. But that's a cliché. Revenge isn't a dish. It's a deliverable. It's a project with a timeline, KPI, and a critical path. And if you execute it correctly, if you dot every I and cross every T and bury every clause in the fine print, doesn't just feel like winning, it feels like balancing the books. I took a sip of my coffee, my phone buzzed, it was a notification from LinkedIn. Madison Archer has viewed your profile. I smiled, let her look. Alexa, I said to the empty, sunlit room, play The Chain by Fleetwood Mac. The bass kicked in. I opened my laptop. I had a new client meeting in 10 minutes. A CEO in Chicago who thought he could hire his mistress as the CFO. Poor guy. He has no idea I'm coming. Real power doesn't announce itself, it operates with quiet precision. Allison's congrats and resignation weren't surrender, but the strategic trigger that unraveled everything. She knew the game, and she played it perfectly. True authority is earned, not just handed out. Never underestimate the quiet ones who build the foundations. Appreciate you all for sticking through this one. See you in the next story.